Okay, so get ready because we're tackling some pretty intense stuff
Wow.
today.
Mm.
President-elect Trump's day one plan for immigration.
Yeah.
This is going to be everywhere in the news.
Right.
So we're going right to the source, the articles that you sent over, and we're breaking it all down. The strategy,
Okay.
the hurdles, and what this could mean for you wherever you are listening in the country.
Absolutely. And this is fascinating, isn't it?
Yeah.
This plan. It's really something because we're looking at mass deportations,
Yeah.
potentially hundreds of thousands,
Right.
maybe even millions of undocumented immigrants.
Wow.
And here's the big one.
Okay.
He wants to use the military to help.
It's wild, right?
It's
Like, are we going to see soldiers on the streets rounding people up?
yeah, a huge shakeup for sure.
Yeah. So many questions come up right away.
Absolutely.
Not just like the practical stuff, but
Yeah.
ethically, is this okay? Legally, is this even possible?
Hmm.
But before we go down that rabbit hole,
Yeah.
let's break down his strategy step by step.
Good idea. Because there are a lot of moving pieces here.
Yeah.
The plan starts by ending parole programs,
Okay.
specifically for people from Cuba, Haiti, Nicaragua, and Venezuela.
Got it.
And that's just the beginning.
Okay.
He wants to overturn the policies that limited deportations
Right.
to only those who were seen as like an immediate threat.
So instead of focusing on like people who've committed serious crimes, this could expand to almost anyone who's undocumented.
Exactly. That's a key point. The articles highlight that initial focus would be on those with criminal records
Okay.
or deemed security threats. But it could go much further.
Wow. Okay, so where does the military fit into this?
Right.
This feels unprecedented, right?
It is a radical shift.
Yeah.
It's completely new. Trump's talking about declaring a national emergency
Right.
on border security, and this would give him the power to use military resources for domestic operations.
Which is usually a huge no-no.
It's something that's not usually done at all.
Wow, so we could see the National Guard, even active duty military, helping with these deportations. What would that even look like practically?
We're talking logistical support like transportation shelter,
Okay.
potentially even setting up temporary holding facilities on military bases.
Oh, wow.
Can you imagine the scale of an operation like that?
It's really hard to picture. Okay, let's say hypothetically he manages to get all of this going.
Mm-hmm.
Can he actually do this legally?
Great.
Wouldn't there be pushback from the courts?
It's a good question to ask. His legal team is working on executive actions that are designed to withstand those challenges.
Okay.
From immigrant rights groups, they're trying to make it airtight.
Yeah.
They're even considering using the Alien Enemies Act of 1798.
Wait, hold on. Isn't that from like the Founding Fathers' time?
Yeah.
What does that even have to do with immigration today?
Yeah, it's a very controversial move. This act allows the deportation of non-citizens from countries that the U.S. is at war with
Okay.
or sees as threats.
Yeah.
Now, whether or not that applies to this situation,
Right.
that's up for debate, and you can
Right.
bet it'll end up in court.
So we've got mass deportations, potentially the military getting involved, some legally questionable moves. It already sounds pretty chaotic, and we haven't even talked about sanctuary cities.
Oh, right. Yeah. Sanctuary cities are those places that have policies that limit cooperation with federal immigration enforcement.
So they're kind of trying to protect undocumented immigrants.
Exactly. They're providing some level of protection.
And we know Trump is not a fan.
Right. He's made that very clear.
He's basically saying get on board with these deportations or get out of the way.
He's called them out directly, saying they need to help with ICE operations.
Yeah.
So this is setting up a showdown between the federal government and those local areas,
Okay, so we have this plan that's bold.
to say the least.
But let's be realistic. Even if Trump manages to push through all the political opposition, are there even enough resources to do all this?
That's a key point.
Wow.
The capacity issue, the Department of Homeland Security would have to massively expand detention facilities,
Right.
hire tons of new people to manage this huge increase.
And that's if they can even find people to take those jobs.
Right.
This whole thing is so controversial.
Absolutely.
Would people want to work on something like this?
That's a factor to think about for sure. And another thing to consider, ICE immigration and customs enforcement, they have about 7,000 officers,
Okay.
and they handle roughly 250,000 deportations per year.
Wow.
We could be talking about quadrupling that workload.
That's insane.
It's mind-boggling.
So even with the best intentions, just the logistics of rounding up this many people and deporting them
Yeah.
would be a nightmare.
It would be a huge undertaking. And it's not just about logistics either. This plan would likely face a wave of legal challenges.
Absolutely.
Advocacy groups are already gearing up for a fight. They argue that using the military for domestic law enforcement violates constitutional rights.
Right.
And these lawsuits could tie the plan up in court for years.
That's huge. And what about the court system itself?
Yeah.
Immigration courts are already so overwhelmed.
They are.
How would they handle all these new deportation cases?
It would create total gridlock. There are already massive backlogs,
Yeah.
especially in states like Colorado. And this would just flood those courts with even more cases, leading to even longer waits.
Wow.
More uncertainty for everyone involved.
It sounds like the whole system would just stop working.
Yeah, it could grind to a halt.
Okay, last but not least, the international aspect. What happens if other countries refuse to take their citizens back?
Well,
We can't exactly force them, can we?
can't force another country to accept deportees.
Yeah.
So that's a real wild card. Trump's team might try diplomatic pressure tactics,
Right.
things like visa restrictions,
Okay.
maybe economic sanctions. But there's no guarantee those would work.
So even if Trump overcomes all the logistical and legal issues here in the U.S.,
Right.
he could still run into a wall on the international stage.
Exactly. It shows how interconnected this whole issue is.
Wow.
It's not just about what happens within our borders. It has global consequences.
Okay, we've covered a lot here.
They have.
We've talked strategy, the logistical and legal hurdles,
Yeah.
the potential international roadblocks. It's a lot to think about.
A lot to process, for sure.
Yeah.
And we've really just scratched the surface.
But before we go any further, I want to pause and think about the human element.
Right.
What would this mean for families, communities, people whose lives are directly impacted by these policies?
It's the most important question, and it's what we'll dive into next.
Exactly. Stay tuned because we're about to get into the real-world impact of all of this.
Yeah, it's easy to get caught up in all the policy details.
Right.
But at the end of the day, this is about people.
Yeah.
Real people whose lives would be totally upended if this plan actually happens.
Absolutely. And let's be real, this plan is going to create a lot of fear and anxiety in immigrant communities.
For sure. Imagine living with that constant fear of raids, never knowing what's next. The stress of possibly being separated from your family. It would be so hard to live with that hanging over you.
It would be paralyzing. And what about the economic impact? I mean, deporting this many people would have ripple effects throughout the entire economy, right?
It's not just individual lives. We're talking about industries and communities that depend on immigrant labor.
Right.
Think about agriculture, construction, hospitality.
Right.
Those sectors would face huge labor shortages.
I'm already picturing it. Empty fields, construction projects just stopped, restaurants that can't find workers. It would be total chaos. And wouldn't that affect prices for everyone?
Absolutely.
No.
Labor shortages usually mean higher wages, which then drives up prices for consumers.
Right.
It's basic economics. So even if you don't personally know any undocumented immigrants, you'd still feel the impact.
Yeah, in your wallet.
Exactly. It's a domino effect.
And speaking of dominoes, what about community police relations? I can't imagine using the military for immigration enforcement would build trust.
It's a recipe for disaster. Picture this: soldiers in your neighborhood conducting raids, separating families.
Right.
It would create so much fear and distrust, and that makes it way harder for the police to do their jobs.
Yeah. Who's going to report a crime or be a witness if they're terrified of getting caught up in a deportation sweep?
Exactly. It has a chilling effect that hurts everyone, not just undocumented immigrants.
This is all sounding pretty bleak, but is there any chance this plan could backfire? Could all this resistance and the legal challenges actually stop it?
It's definitely possible.
Yeah.
Don't forget, Trump faced a ton of pushback during his first term on immigration.
Yeah.
There were lawsuits, protests, international condemnation. And this time, the opposition seems even more organized, more prepared.
Yeah, like they've learned from experience.
Exactly, and that's going to make things really interesting.
Right.
This isn't just about policy. It's a clash of values, a fight over who belongs and who has the right to be here.
Yeah. It feels like we're headed for a major showdown. Okay, we've talked about the potential consequences, but let's zoom out for a second. Where does this fit into the big picture? What does this tell us about immigration policy under a second Trump administration?
But it's a clear sign that we're going back to hardline policies.
Okay.
It's like doubling down on what he did during his first term. And it's not just about immigration.
What do you mean?
It reflects a broader shift in American politics in general.
Okay.
We're seeing more nationalism, a bigger focus on borders and security, this feeling that anyone who's an outsider is a threat.
So it's not just about Trump himself, it's about a deeper change that's happening in society.
Exactly. And that's what makes this so significant. This isn't just a policy debate. It's a reflection of a fundamental shift in how America sees itself.
Wow. Okay, so we've got the strategy, the possible consequences, the big picture. But the real question is, how is this actually going to play out in the real world? We can guess, but we don't have a crystal ball.
It's true. But we can look for clues, patterns, things that might give us an idea of what's coming. And one of the most important things to watch is how local communities react.
Right. We talked about the different reactions from law enforcement, but what about the communities themselves? How are they getting ready for this potential crackdown?
From what I'm seeing in these articles, immigrant advocacy groups are mobilizing.
Okay.
They're holding Know Your Rights workshops, creating support networks, trying to give communities the tools to fight back.
So it's like a grassroots movement, people coming together to protect their own.
Exactly. It's about building resilience, knowing how to work the system, standing up for your rights.
And that's so important because this isn't just a temporary thing. This policy shift could have effects that last for years.
Absolutely. This plan could have ripple effects for years, maybe even decades.
Right.
And it's not just about immigration. It's about the core of American society.
What do you mean?
Think about the potential impact on things like social cohesion, race relations, our sense of national identity. This plan brings up fundamental questions about who we are as a country and what we believe in.
It's like a giant social experiment, but with real people's lives on the line.
That's a powerful way to put it. And it's something that every American, no matter what they think about immigration, needs to think about.
So as we're wrapping up this part of our deep dive, it feels like we've just scratched the surface of a much bigger conversation.
That's often the case with issues as complex as this.
Right.
But hopefully we've given you some tools and insights to help you take part in that conversation in a more thoughtful way.
To understand the different sides, to see things from multiple perspectives, and to come to your own conclusions.
Exactly. Because in a world where we're bombarded with information, it's more important than ever to be able to think critically and engage with these issues in a way that matters.
And that's what these deep dives are all about.
Yeah.
Helping you become a more informed and engaged citizen. Now, before we wrap up completely, I want to bring it back to you, the listener. We've talked about the possible impact on the whole country.
Right.
But let's bring it closer to home.
Yeah.
What could this plan mean for your city?
Right.
Your community?
That's where the rubber meets the road, right?
Exactly.
It's one thing to see the headlines, but it's another thing to think about how this plays out in your own neighborhood.
Right, so think about it.
Yeah.
What industries in your area rely on immigrant labor? Are there farms, construction companies, restaurants that could be affected by this?
And think about the social fabric of your community.
Right.
Does your city have a history of being welcoming to immigrants?
Okay.
Are there strong support systems already in place?
Yeah.
Those things will play a big role in how your community responds to this plan.
It's like each city's going to have its own mini version of this national drama.
Yeah.
And the results could be totally different depending on where you live.
Absolutely. And that's why it's so important to pay attention to what's happening locally.
Right.
Don't just rely on the national news.
Good.
Find out what your mayor, your city council, your local police are saying about this plan.
Because they're the ones who are actually going to have to put these policies into action.
Right. Or resist them.
Exactly. And their decisions will have a direct impact on your life.
Absolutely.
This is where things get really interesting to me.
Yeah.
Remember how we talked about sanctuary cities?
Yeah.
This is where that whole fight could really explode.
If a city decides they're going to resist, that they want to protect their undocumented residents,
right,
then you could see a head-on collision between local and federal authorities.
Wow.
It would be like a legal tug-of-war with the community caught in the middle.
And the courts would be flooded with cases. Think about the immigration court in your state.
Right.
Could it handle all these new deportation cases?
It's very unlikely.
Yeah.
We already talked about those backlogs and delays. This would just make things worse. And it's important to remember that behind every single case file, there's a human story, a family whose future is uncertain.
It's easy to forget that when we're talking about policy, but these are real people's lives.
Absolutely. Yeah. And their lives are going to be deeply affected by what happens with this plan.
So where do we go from here? It feels like we're standing on the edge of a cliff.
In a way, we are.
Okay.
We're at a turning point in American history.
Yeah.
And the choices we make now will have consequences that last for a long time.
It's kind of scary, to be honest.
I get that, but it's also an opportunity.
Okay.
A chance to get informed, to talk to each other about this, and to make your voice heard.
Because this isn't just about Trump or immigration policy.
It's bigger than that.
It's about who we are as a nation, what values we believe in.
It's about justice, fairness, compassion, creating a society where everyone feels welcome and safe.
That's powerful stuff. So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with one final thought.
Go for it.
Don't let this just be another news story that you forget about tomorrow. Take what you've learned here.
Right.
Dive deeper into the things that really resonated with you.
Yeah.
Get involved in your community.
Absolutely.
Make a difference.
That's the best takeaway.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We hope you found it insightful, and we'll see you next time.